Okay, so now on to the third part of our session on Aristotle. So now I'd like you to turn to the little journalism, the newspaper article by Shute. So this is partly a way of showing you that Aristotle is still totally relevant for today. This is why it doesn't matter that Aristotle is the oldest person that we'll read. Because if he was right about human nature 2,500 years ago, human nature hasn't changed much or at all. So what he said, if he's right, should still be relevant for today. So let's review a few things that we've said in Aristotle so far that have been our reading that basically I think you can see versions of in the Shute. Okay, so first Aristotle says human beings, every individual human being is different, but we all have certain things in common. He also says that virtue is something which you can develop. You can become a better person by sort of training yourself, which we'll really focus on in the next, later on, okay, in the next recordings. So you can develop or get better at doing what you think is morally right. You can make it easier for yourself to be a good person. That another point is that this sort of training or teaching yourself how to actually execute moral behavior, actually follow through on moral desires, can begin when you're very, very young. And that there's certain things which are basically just good for all of us if we want to live together in a human society. So the way all that comes together in Shute is Shute shows how there's this research that if you teach children self-discipline, if you teach them to do things that they sort of don't want to do, but that adults all agree are good things to do, like eating all your vegetables before you have dessert, if you can get a young child to start doing that stuff when they're young, if you can get them trained in the habits of moral behavior early, it's easier for them to do moral and self-improving things later down the road. So the basic point, all the details are in the Shute though, is that if you get kids to enjoy picking up their blocks when they're young, they're going to be more likely to pick up their workspace when they get their first job. That's going to make them more likely to get promoted. Then they'll be better at guiding other people, teaching them, etc. So they'll get promoted higher and higher up the chain of ladder. On the other hand, if you let kids do whatever they want in preschool, they can eat whatever they want, they can get into fights with other kids and not get punished, they can come and go from the preschool as they please, well, then they're not going to develop moral skills because you're not making them. And then later on when they go in the world, even if they want to do really well at their job, it's really hard for them to keep a clean workspace. It's really hard for them to interact calmly with others even when there's a disagreement. Because they've never really been shown how. They've never really been able to learn by doing. So this is how, in a sentence, we can unite Shute with Aristotle. Human beings learn by doing. Just being told that something is good, just being told that you ought to do something, isn't usually enough. We have to learn by doing. Human beings learn everything by doing, Aristotle says. Everything. So morality or ethics is also something that you can only learn or get good at by doing it. So what this means is that you have to make young children perform the actions that we think as adults are good. If you can't successfully get them to do that activity enough when they're young, they will gladly and successfully do it when they're an adult. So let me say all that again, because it's sort of how the second Aristotle reading in the 160s and the Shute reading all connect together. Human beings learn by doing. Human beings, in fact, learn how to do everything by doing it, including morality or ethics. So, if you want someone to be a conscientious, hard worker, if you want them to be honest, if you want them to deal well with other people, all these basic ethical, social obligations we have to other people, you have to start them young. Right? So that's how you get someone to be ethical, is basically you raise them right. You make them act well when they're young, even when they don't want to. And then when they're older, an adult, and they want to, it'll be easy for them to act well, because they've been doing it their whole darn life. So once more, the pages 165 and 166 of Aristotle, that's where all this is said in great detail. This is where Aristotle expands on the comments he made about virtue and habit on page 19, A and B, page 20, and a little bit on page 21. All that gets expanded further on pages 165 to 166 of our assigned reading. He says, look, doing the right thing is difficult. Doing the right thing is always difficult. Doing the right thing for children is even more difficult. So think of it this way. Who do you think is more likely to share food with you when they're hungry? Your grandma or your youngest cousin? So sometimes I'll ask you questions and I don't know how you might respond. I'm pretty sure almost everyone's going to say grandma's more likely to share food with you when she's hungry than your youngest cousin is likely to share food with you when they're hungry. Right? Okay. Now, is that because children have bigger appetites? No, not really. It's because children just do whatever naturally, instantly occurs to them. They're a lot like animals where they just act on instinct. Food, gotta have it. Grandma, though, has spent her whole life working on living with other people, working on doing what she thinks she should do, rather than just what she feels like doing in the instant. That's why grandma, even when she's hungry, can give you half of her plate, and the kid just can't, right? The kid cannot bring themselves to do that. Okay, so now I want you to pause and think about this for a while. It's just a general set of questions, okay? But around this sort of example of grandma versus your youngest cousin, do you think, in fact, in general, do you agree that in general, kids are bad at doing the right thing and adults are better at doing the right thing? Okay, so pause the recording now and think about that. Do you think that in general, children are bad at doing what's ethically right and adults are better at doing what's ethically right? Okay, so if you haven't already, pause the recording and think about that, because I have a follow-up question for you. The follow-up question is this. Okay, in some ways it seems like children are worse at doing the right thing and adults are better at doing the right thing. But then again, who's going to embezzle money? Who's going to murder? Well, it's not kids, right? It's adults. So, I'm going to ask you a difficult but open-ended question. There's no wrong answer. And I really want to hear you discuss this in the discussion board. Who do you think's better morally? Little kids or adults? And why would that be? Are children in fact innocent, as some of us would say? And adults are, cynical, selfish, mean-spirited? Or do you think it's maybe the opposite? Well, children are wild. Children are selfish and do whatever they want. And it's only adults who learn to moderate their desires and act right some of the time. So if you had to choose one or the other, who's more often morally good? The young child or the adult? And why do you think that might be? So just speculate here and share your thoughts in the discussion board. Who's better? Who's morally better? Children or adults? And why do you think that might be? Okay. So, as I said, it's really a requirement that when I ask you questions and ask you to pause the recordings, you actually do and give yourself longer than you think you might need in order to address these questions. And then the questions are sort of designed to be ones that will be questions you might have pre-existing ideas about that you can share in the discussion, and then you all can speak with each other back and forth about your ideas. So, now I'm going to sort of complicate it, or we're going to ask difficult questions of Aristotle. The really blunt way to put this is I'm going to raise possible criticisms of Aristotle here, and we'll see what you think about the criticisms. So, we've asked with Aristotle has said, human beings learn by doing. That nobody's born good at writing papers, you have to practice in school. Nobody's born good at three-point shots. Even if your body is particularly well suited to that, you still have to practice. Fundamentals, right? Nobody's born good at dating. That's why the first date's always so shaky. Right? All these things we have to practice, and we get better at them by doing. Fair enough. But what that seems to mean for Aristotle is that human beings naturally are neither good nor evil. And he says as much in different words on page 19a near the top. He says human beings are not born good by nature, and they're not born evil or bad by nature. So he says human beings, when they're born, are basically like lumps of clay. With good parents and a good peer group, you will be molded, the wet clay of the child will be molded into something beautiful and something strong. Something beautiful and strong and useful, like a really nice pot, right? A really nice pot. But wet clay can also be molded badly by bad parenting and a bad peer group. Then it's molded into something ugly, not very useful, maybe the pot has holes in it, and not very strong, where it can be broken or disrupted by a little disruption. Okay, by a little shakeup, it can be broken. So once more, let me say that again. Aristotle says that human beings are not good by nature, and we're not bad by nature. So you're not born a sinner, and you're not born a saint. All human beings are born neutral. Just like a lump of clay is not really ugly yet, it's not really a bad pot yet, because it's some other thing. The child is neutral and is waiting to be shaped positively or negatively. People who are shaped positively by adults and those around them in their peer group grow up beautiful, metaphorically, beautiful, strong, and useful to others, like a well-shaped pot. Those who are shaped badly by their parents and by other people grow up not so useful. They have holes, they lose your money, whatever it might be, and liable to break or fall apart at the slightest disruption. Okay, it's a metaphor, it makes sense. What this means, though, is that for Aristotle, someone like Jeffrey Dahmer, who grew up and killed people and ate them, that he wasn't born that way, that something in his history shaped him, nudged him, encouraged him somehow to be that kind of person. I don't know. I'd like to hear what you all think in the discussion. I think someone like Jeffrey Dahmer, in order to do that kind of stuff, must have just been born off, right? But here's the thing. If someone like Jeffrey Dahmer could be born off, like born to be a demon, basically, then maybe some people are born to be criminals. That's sort of a disturbing thought, right? Does that mean people might be born with like a criminal gene? Here's another disturbing thought, and I want to hear what you think about that. If people can be born, social deviants, criminals, sociopaths, psychopaths like Jeffrey Dahmer, what that also might mean is that if you're a good person, and I'm sure you are, if you're a good person, it's not a choice you made to be a good person, but rather you were just born that way. You were born with brown hair. You have no choice about that. You were born with the good gene. So do you see what I'm saying? If people are just all subject to habit, like Aristotle says, it's sort of hard to understand what habits would have developed a Jeffrey Dahmer. Right? Like, even if his parents abused him, which I don't know if they did, but even if they abused him, most abused people don't go on to kill and murder and eat people. So it seems like some goodness and badness can't be trained into people. Same thing, I don't think Mother Teresa just had a really good mother superior that trained her to be nice. There seems to be something extra going on there. But then pause, and then we flip that question. Right? So the way I just said it, it seems like Aristotle might be wrong, basically. Some people are good or bad regardless of habit and parents and peer groups. On the other hand, if we think Aristotle's wrong that way, and we say, no, Jeffrey Dahmer was born that way, then good people don't really get any credit because they didn't choose to be good. Do you see what I mean? If you want to say badness, like Jeffrey Dahmer, can be fate or destiny, something like that, forced on them from the outside, then goodness too, it would seem, would be something like destiny or fate forced on you from the outside. What that would mean is if you're a good person, if Aristotle's wrong, that virtue's habitual, and that vice or being a bad person's habitual, then that means something like it's natural. Well, if you're good, then it means you were naturally born good. And I would say you don't get any credit for being good if you're born that way. So it's a big, messy set of questions here. There's a million ways each one of you could take one small part of this. But basically, is being good something you're born with? Is it something others help you to do? Or is it a personal choice each time? All of these seem not right. If it's a choice, why would you ever choose to be bad? Like, why would you choose to murder people and eat them? What kind of choice is that? If it's just habit, then how do we get people like Mother Teresa? And if it's natural, then frankly, nobody gets credit for being good because it's just the luck of the draw. And criminals, it's not really their fault because they were just born that way. So, once more, I'll end the discussion, this recording on that note. It's a very open-ended set of things, but do you think when people are good or bad, do you think it's natural that they were born that way? Do you think it's a choice every single time to do something bad or do something good? Or do you think it's like Aristotle says, that it has something to do with your environment, nurture rather than nature, how you're raised, the circumstances you find yourself in? So, re-asking from a different angle a question I asked you before. What makes people good or bad? Why are some people good and other people are bad? A big question, but certainly appropriate for our ethics course. So, we'll end the recording right here. And indeed, we'll end this first day of Aristotle with this recording. There's a chunk of Aristotle on page 20, page 19 going over to 20, about virtue as a mean. And we're going to talk about that next time because it connects up with scrutin. But we'll end this session right here. And I do want you to answer this question. Why are some people good and some people are bad? Is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it a personal choice? Okay, I want you to share that in the discussion board. If you have any questions, as always, shoot me an email. Always ask me a question as soon as it occurs to you. But for now, I'd like you to ask that question or answer that question. Why are some people good and some people are bad? Nature, you're just born that way. Nurture, it's about how you're raised. Or just some choice every time to, I don't know, choose to be evil sometimes. So what do you think about that? Okay, thank you, everyone.